role on everything. 3 years is a long time. And unfortunately, through the past 3 years, things are deteriorating. They're not getting better. So if it was for the first year, you might take it. But 3 years is a long time. And within those times, what we are seeing is not things getting better. What we are seeing is that things getting worse. So that's what is really concerning. If things are getting worse in this rate, what are we going to see in 5 years, right? If you know, majority of the free press, the media are closed now, and most of them are imprisoned. Most of the political leaders who are against Dr. Abiy are imprisoned, except those in Tigray. Okay. So the overall situation is really bad. Clearly, Dr. Abiy has become a dictator. So he meets all the definitions and the criteria for a dictator. There is one similarity with previous dictators that we know that Dr. Abiy has. If you see Saddam Hussein, Colonel Muhammad Gaddafi, Idi Amin Dada, or Colonel Mengistu Haile Mariam of Ethiopia, if you see all of them, they have some similarities. All of them come from the military. That's one thing. And the other thing is when they come, except maybe Mengistu Haile Mariam, the rest of them were very popular, like Dr. Abiy was then. They come popular and they focus on building their personal image. So Dr. Abiy is doing the same thing that Saddam Hussein was doing then, Muammar Gaddafi was doing during his first few years, and Idi Amin Dada was doing in his first few years. They are building their personal image. They are showing, building things that would, what they call the white elephant projects, basically that are populist and that would inspire or motivate the urban population. So Dr. Abiy is working on the palace and Addis Ababa Park and things like that, which are mainly focused on image building and white elephant projects. So we see the same trend as the other dictators. He also built the Republican Guard. Saddam Hussein did the same thing, military that protects them as a person rather than building a military that protects the nation or the country. So the other thing is he is closing all the media that may open any criticisms against him, and also imprisoned all the political leaders that are against him. So basically, he is a dictator.
He's on his way to be a dictator. Again, I'm going to have to play a devil's advocate here. From the establishment of Abiy, Prime Minister Abiy and some of his close advisors often say that the transition is becoming difficult due to the TPLF withdrew from federal government. As they say, retreat with honor. So the TPLF, with all their ammunition, with all their structure, went back to Mekelle, so to speak. So from that it makes it more difficult for the transition to go smooth. So again, they're pointing their fingers towards TPLF for the destabilization of a nation. Is there an element of truth to this statement?
I don't think so. It is typical of, that's another trait of a dictator.
Okay.
Typically what dictators do is they find an enemy of the people. So even if it doesn't exist, they would create it. So today, Dr. Abiy and his party, they call it Prosperity Party, are not performing as the people, to the extent of the people's expectation. So they have to find someone to blame. and there is an easy one right next door. So yeah, they find it easy to blame it on TPLF. If TPLF is to be blamed, I think they should be blamed because they allowed such incapable leaders to take control of the country. They should have fought while they were inside EPRDF and I think tried to maintain order. Now, as you may know, there is no order in the country except only state in the Ethiopian Federation that has working government is Tigray. The rest of the country is under military control. The government apparatus has crumbled. So if they have to be blamed, I think they have to be blamed for letting these incapable people to take control of the country.
Mm-hmm. Well, by the same token, some others would say if TPLF refused to withdraw from the central government, it would have been the end of TPLF itself, because the entire uprising, particularly with the Oromos and the Amharas alliance, was in a very strong force. They came in a very strong way. So the TPLF withdrawal, for whatever reason, strategic, tactical, created some sort of order for the next government. But if TPLF was there, it would have been very difficult, particularly for TPLF, and by the same token for the Tigrayan people as well.
I do agree.
Yeah, okay.
Would it have been worse? I don't think so.
Yeah.
It would have been better, to be frank. We have to understand the situation in Ethiopia. The quest from the people is not only democratic rights or economic rights. There has always been tensions between the different nations in Ethiopia. As you know, in Ethiopia, there are many nations and nationalities. So whenever one nation is in power, or one ethnic group, if we call them, is in power, the others opposed. It's a very natural, and it has always been there. So the unrest in Oromia and Amhara, some of it is for democratic rights and also economic rights. But the main driver was that ethnic drive. That the motivation was mainly ethnical drive, that the Tigray-dominated government should be changed. Now, looking at it retrospectively, looking back, you have to appreciate the TPLF leaders. Today, the Dr. Abbey administration is killing in thousands every day to ameliorate those people oppositions and the peaceful demonstrations and things like that. TPLF could have done that easily. They had the better control. Actually, they had the better military strategists and planners. But they chose to leave power instead of killing the people, like what Dr. Abbey is doing today. So looking retrospectively, now I respect them. I'm one of the people who used to push for change against TPLF. But now looking at it retrospectively, I have to give them credit for not doing what Dr. Abbey is doing today. They chose to leave power rather than killing the people in thousands every day.
Yeah, that would not bring the situation better anyways. If they stay there and continue with the repression, it would have been,
It would have been the same story. The people will continue to demonstrate. At least they would have the better hand and the better control.
Okay.
Now, if they allowed all political powers to come and negotiate together and come up with a better government.
That for 27 years, so they're not about to start.
Exactly, as I said, they should be blamed for that.
Okay. Now let me go back to my question. I think we did enough opening to get to my questions. Over the past week, the Tigray region conducted a regional election. What is the significance of this election, and who are the participants?
So yes, actually the Tigray election was conducted peacefully and successfully, and the significance of election for the people of Tigray is really, really big because, as you know, the Tigray people fought for their own right, for the right of self-determination during the previous regime of Colonel Mengistu Haile Mariam for 17 years. And they sacrificed more than 60,000 lives. More than 100,000 people were lost their bodies for that. And even before that, we call that the second Wayane, or the second revolution. There was the first revolution during the time of Emperor Haile Selassie. And even during that time, thousands of lives were lost for the same cause, which is the right to self-rule, for self-administration. So I don't think there will be any situation that the people of Tigray would forego this right.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So they conducted this election because this is something we fought for and we are willing to defend and to die for. So because of that, the turnout was great, and more than 90% of the registered voters voted, and it was conducted peacefully. There was any problem reported.
Mm-hmm.
So overall, this was a successful election, but it has meaning too. We are, as the people of Tigray are sending message to the Dr. Abbey that they will not entertain a dictator anymore.
Okay. The follow-up question goes with the same line. Prime Minister Abbey and other high-ranking federal officials called the election illegitimate and irresponsible. What is your take on this matter? I would like to add to this, the reason they say that is because it did not abide by the federal law. So if you can connect that to your response.
Sure. According to the Tigrayans and any sane person, the Ethiopian constitution clearly stipulates that the term of a government or an administration is 5 years. It doesn't give any room for extension of that length of time. So the Dr. Abiy administration, as any typical dictator would do, used the corona as the coronavirus, the COVID situation as a reason, and tried to extend their term of administration. And the constitution does not allow that. It's clearly put there. That's one thing. So from the perspective of the people of Tigray, the illegitimate is the government of Dr. Abiy. That term ends on October 10th. After that, that government, that federal government, is the one that's illegitimate according to the constitution. Now, that's if we are speaking of legality or de jure. Is it legal? The Tigray election was decided by the parliament of the Tigray state. And according to the constitution, the sovereign power is the power of the nations and the nationalities. And the Tigray nations, through the parliament, through the Tigray parliament, have decided they would conduct the election as per the stipulation of the constitution. So if the parliament decided, it's legitimate. The other thing is, that's the de jure, right? The legality. But legitimacy come only from the legality perspective. You have to look at the fact on the ground. Do people accept it? Do people take it? At this time, the Tigray people fully, with more than 90% of people that are at voting age coming out to the election and elected. So the election in Tigray is legitimate, not because anybody else says it's legitimate or not. It's because the Tigray people decided so. That's the number one source of legitimacy. So it's a de facto situation. Whether anybody likes it or not, whether it's legally accepted or not, if the people say so, it's legitimate. So it's de facto. Now, is it de jure? Is it legally? Is it legal? I believe so, but I would leave that to the legal scholars, law scholars, and other people who can translate that. But in practice, it's a legitimate election.
Well, again, let me play devil's advocate. If you're part of that federal system within Ethiopia, and Tigray has a representation at the federal system, and that federal system is the one that drafts the law. So without the permission of that federal government, if Tigray does his own thing, independent of the direction of the federal government, wouldn't that considers that you're violating the law?
Not at all. So this is because of our society in general comes from a long history of paternalistic thinking. Everybody thinks that the federal government is over the regional governments, which is not true. Actually, the federal government, the power of the federal government is what it gets from the regional governments. So the Chapter 1 of the Ethiopian Constitution says that the sovereignty of the country are the nations and nationalities of Ethiopia. So the Tigray nation is the sovereign nation. Now the Tigray nation gives a little bit of its power to the federal.
Yep.
So if there is anybody who controls somebody, it should be the nations who should control the federal government, not the federal government controls the nations.
How about you have an election commissioner out there that is composed of many representation of ethnic regional states, gave that mandate to that regional election board.
Yep.
So by default or by design, I believe there's a lady who's in charge of the election board. Her word and her citation would have had an upper hand. So the local government doing his own things is just like that federal system does not matter.
Yeah, so that's a big misunderstanding. So in the Constitution, there are the substantial rights and responsibilities, and also the those other rights that come as a result of those substantial values. The key value is self-administration is a key pillar of the Constitution. Now, the Constitution identifies the National Election Board as the organ of the government that conducts elections. But that election board is created so that it conducts when the government wants it to conduct. Now, if the Tigray government wants to conduct an election, then they can hire the federal electoral board to conduct their election. If the federal election board is not willing to do that, they have every right to create their own election board and conduct it.
That doesn't say on the Constitution.
Correct. Okay, in the Constitution, there's another section that says, in a situation where there is it's not clearly stipulated who does what. The regional governments have the upper right. It clearly states that.
Okay.
That's one thing. The other thing is we always think of the federal parliament, the only place where the law comes from. That's not true. The regional parliaments have their own rights. They are sovereign rights. They are not under any other government organ. They are sovereign, and they can create their own laws too. And if the Tigray government creates its own law, it has every right to do so.
Okay, we'll come to that. The power and the jurisdiction of a federal as well as a state. We can come to one of the questions.
Yeah.
So we can continue. Now let me get to the third question. Previously, the TPLF dominated EPRDF administration held an election previously, and it was known to be a sham election, and the outcome was predictable. You remember the 100% won. What makes it different this time?
Election held in Tigray, was it as bad as the last what happened in the last 5 years? I don't think so. None of the political parties who participated complained. None of them were arrested. They had equal access to media. The people freely expressed their opinions. Debates were held openly on the media. I have yet to hear complaints from any party that participated in the election. So that's the only way you can measure how whether it was democratic or not. I believe it was a democratic election. So hopefully we will see similar democratic elections in other nations of Ethiopia.
Yeah. Before I go to the other one, by the way, all election is not a gauge for a democratic process. And there's few Tigrayan political parties who are complaining outside that they were not allowed to be part of, or they were intimidated to begin with to be part of the process. And just because you're conducting an election in that sense, it would not make it democratic. But as you said, it's better to have an election than not having an election. When you compare that in that sense. But the essence of democracy will not be gauged on election alone. That's why I brought the other question.
Yeah, I have to respectfully disagree with you on that.
Okay.
First of all, it is a measure of democracy, definitely. Whether it's good or not can also be a measure of democracy. But whether you have it or not is a key measure for defining a state, democratic or not. So not just by itself, it doesn't make the states democratic.
Yeah.
But that's one key pillar of a democratic state.
Well,
the access for the people to elect their leaders, their leaders freely. Now that freely is quote unquote, right?
Yeah, okay.
But first, you got to have the election to have it to make it free.
Yeah, I mean the movement, the idea of an election is a democratic by its very nature. But the implementation and the kind of process that you use to conduct the election, not necessarily. That's why I went back to that 100% win over EPRDF previously. There's no element of democracy there. It was just managed and controlled. So in that sense, that's what I was talking about. It has nothing to do with democratic expression. It has something to do that it needs to be done. So you do it in a way where it cannot affect the status quo, But I take your response as legitimate. Let me get to the next question. What is going to be the relationship between the federal government, who claims to have the authority over the regional states, and Tigray regional state in particular? Will it continue to be a state within a state? To elaborate a little bit on this one, you can have your own election, you can have your own conduct. Maybe the federal system will allow you to secede down the line. So is that part of the trend that's going to be happening in Ethiopia, or is it something different?
So first, does the system allow for a state to exist within a state? Yes, that's how it has been. In Ethiopia, there are 9 regional states which are sovereign.
Okay.
And the federal government is the one that manages the international issues and the relationship between the states. Now, because of EPRDF's, the previous EPRDF's failure to fully implement it, there still have been some centralization of power. What we hoped with Dr. Abbey coming to power was that decentralization of power would materialize. But what's happening is the reverse, the opposite of that. Dr. Abbey is trying to accumulate power for himself.
Okay.
Having said that, the only state which he could not take the power of is Tigray at this time. My hope is that the other states will eventually gain their sovereign right to administer themselves, but at the same time, keep the Ethiopian state together. From what I understand, the only way the Ethiopian state can continue to exist is if we allow the different nations to administer themselves. Otherwise, to take that sovereign right will cause, I fear, the end of Ethiopia as a state. So Tigray, I believe, will continue as a state within the Ethiopian state, as long as the federal government will respect that right.
Mm-hmm.
My fear is that, as any other dictator, the thirst for power may push Dr. Abiy to act otherwise, and that will start the disintegration of Ethiopia. If he tries to force himself on Tigray, I think Tigray has every power to defend itself, but the result of it might be separation of some states. Mm. Now, you mentioned the word secession. I have yet to hear any political party talk about secession in Tigray. There is one party that's calling for an independent state of Tigray. Tigray is the nucleus of Ethiopia. The very Ethiopian state was created in Tigray. So Tigray is not a branch that would secede or that would separate from the tree. It's the root of the Ethiopian state. So I don't think secession is the right word to express what those parties are asking for. They are saying an independent state of Tigray, but they did not win the election. I think majority of the Tigray population loves the idea of Ethiopia, the Ethiopian state, wants to make it successful. But the only way that can work is if the federal government respects their right to administer themselves.
Okay. Yeah. Let me qualify that. You are right. Maybe I'm passing judgments, preconceived ideas. But when you're talking about the state having equal power, probably more stronger than the federal government, the idea of federally controlled management will go out of the window. It may not materialize in Ethiopia. As much as you're claiming that the cradle of civilization, Ethiopia, came from the Tigray region or from the highlands of Ethiopia, that regardless of the political wish and thinking of a united Ethiopia, the reality on the ground indicates otherwise. There's no cooperation between the state and the federal government. To give you an example, you can go to Lebanon. You know, they say we had a common history. But now, the federal governments, Iran, if something happened to Iran or Syria, Hezbollah or the other factions, Amal or Druze, whatever, they have more power than the federal government on occasion. Yeah, and they can even influence the central government, not by choice, but by force. And as you see, Syria divided in so many spots. Although their wish was to remain Syria, the Syrian nationalism is very strong, as good as Ethiopia, I would say. But the reality is different, especially when you design a system where the states have an upper hand over the central government or the federal government. Those things can happen. I'm not wishing those things will happen, but eventually the trend will go that way. Today is Tigray, tomorrow will be Oromo, and they will all ascertain their rights. So when you're facing with a dilemma like this, how would you respond to it?
So I think that's one major problem. The urban central Ethiopia, the people in the central Ethiopia, the urban people, have this concern that, well, if every nation has its own state, then how is Ethiopia continue? Well, my answer to them is the only way that Ethiopia is going to continue to exist is if we respect that right. If we respect the Walaita right to self-administration, if we respect the Sidama right to self-administration, then the Sidama and the Walaita people have all the patriotic feeling about Ethiopianism. They're not going to secede. The only reason they would secede, they would want to secede, is if you try to force them to accept some other identity. Mm-hmm. The same works for Tigray. In Tigray, as I said, Tigray is the root of Ethiopia. So there is no reason the Tigray people would want to secede. They will not secede. The only reason they would want to create their own state, their own nation state, is if you force them to change their identity. So I think there needs to be a major change in the social thinking of the central urban population in Ethiopia. What they see as risk is the only savior to the Ethiopian state, which is respecting the rights of the nations and nationalities in Ethiopia. Respect the right of the Walaita to self-administration. Respect the right of the Tigray to self-administration. Then the Tigray, the Walaita, the Oromo, all of them will come together to continue the Ethiopian state. If we try to force them to change their identity, I think that would cause the disintegration of Ethiopia.
Okay. One more question within that subject. EPRDF tried that for 27 years. And the movement that you see today was complaining about the TPLF dominated EPRDF rule in that sense. So it hasn't worked for 27 years. It hasn't worked for the last 2 years under Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed. What makes you think it will work in the future?
I respectfully disagree with you on three things there. Okay. First of all, did EPRDF fully respect the nations and nationalities' right to self-administration? Not to the fullest. Of course, EPRDF ratified a constitution that respects the right of nations to self-administration, but still maintain control over all the regions. So all the regions were controlled from Addis Ababa. So it was not fully implemented, first of all. So I disagree on that. Second, but even the small rights it gave to the nations and nationalities brought peace in Ethiopia for 25 years. That's not easy. It's not easy. And what the Oromo youth, what the Walaita youth, the Sidama youth, what they are asking today is not to go back, not to reverse that. They are asking for the fullest implementation of that principle. So what I'm advocating is, let's respect that right of the nations. That's the only way we can keep Ethiopia together. Otherwise, this youth, if that right is not respected, they will start thinking about other options. So the only way to reverse that is to respect the nation's right to self-administration.
Okay. Thank you. That's good enough. Okay. My next question will be different. So far we're talking about the internal affairs of Ethiopian politics. This it makes it a little blurry because it has the other factor, the Eritrean factor.
Sure.
So Prime Minister Abbey administration forged his relationship with President Isaias Afwerki by accepting the Ethio-Eritrean Boundary Commission resolutions unconditionally. Yet nothing has changed on the ground. Why is that the Nobel Peace recipient remains uninvolved and uninterested to resolve the dispute once and for all?
So, as I mentioned to you earlier, I have reached to a conclusion that Dr. Abiy is a dictator. And obviously, President Isaias has been a dictator for a long time. So there is a mutual interest here in maintaining the status quo. They would like to maintain this status quo because, of course, President Isaias wants that enemy of the people, the presumed enemy of the people, to exist so that he can continue his grasp of power until he dies. So he wants the status quo to continue. They will not want to resolve it. For Dr. Abiy, he got the Nobel Peace Prize for getting this peace, which, even though it's not, it has not materialized. He got that Nobel Prize for that. Now he wants to keep that going. He doesn't want any disruption because that would nullify his Nobel Peace Prize. So I think he's trying to convince President Isaias, who will not budge, because I think peace between Ethiopia and Eritrea and a complete normalization is a big risk for his power.
For Prime Minister?
From President Isaias.
Isaias power, okay.
When the Eritrean people get the chance, even the small days, the number of days that they got the opportunity to go to Ethiopia and mainly to Tigray and see the better facilities that they are getting, the better political situation, that already is creating a problem in Eritrea. So I don't think he will want that to continue. So he wants to continue this blockade to continue. Like
in the previous the administration, the no peace, no war that the Eritrean government always uses, to, because the boundary issue was not resolved. So he was using that as an excuse to prolong his power. But at this particular moment, there's the Prime Minister Abbey promised to resolve the border dispute unconditionally. And it's been 2.5 years so far. It has not been done. So, the reason for President Isaias to continue his regime under a state of emergency was because somebody took the sovereignty, Eritrean sovereignty. And this did not happen. Although it's been promised, got all the hoopla from both Ethiopia and the Eritrean government. Finally, the dispute will be resolved peacefully. But nothing happened. But my question is, okay, Isaias, for his own motive, for his own interest, can prolong this excuse indefinitely. Prime Minister Abiy will do this, provided that one of the reasons is to control the northern parts of the Tigray region. Eritrea will be on the northern part, Ethiopia from the south. So it's just like it will be a good managing point of view for Abiy to keep the pressure on the TPLF or on Tigray. But the Bademe issue and all the disputed territories in that area, this is my curiosity. Who's controlling them? Is it the Tigrayan TPLF army or the federal process right away, who do they address it?
So in principle and from legal perspective, of course, the federal government and the defense force of Ethiopia that should defend the sovereignty of Ethiopia and maintain the boundaries. The de facto situation today is in Tigray. Every boundary of Tigray is maintained by the Tigray forces. That's the situation. That's the reality on the ground today.
Including Badime?
Everything, as I said, every boundary of Tigray is maintained by the Tigray forces, and the situation forces that. One thing that needs to be known is that the Tigray people has a long history of statehood and military capabilities. So I think in Tigray at this time, enough capability has been built to defend any attack either from the federal force or from the so-called Eritrean government. Even though I don't believe that the Eritrean people have any interest to go to war with neither Tigray or Sudan or Ethiopia or anyone. So at this time, many people may think that Tigray is under siege. While there are efforts to put Tigray under siege, but the reality on the ground is that Tigray still remains to be a formidable power to defend its interest. So on the other hand, Dr. Abbey's administration, this is where many people get it wrong. If there is any conflict created, it's not going to be between Tigray and the rest of Ethiopia. It's going to be between Tigray and Dr. Abbey's administration. Dr. Abbey's administration is not, has lost its legitimacy with the Oromo people. Today, the Afar people are questioning his legitimacy. The Wolaita people are questioning his legitimacy. At this time, I think Dr. Abbey's jurisdiction remains only in Addis Ababa. Majority of the Ethiopian population today does not consider him legitimate. And because of that, the government, the administrative apparatus has crumbled across all the country, of course, except in Tigray and in Addis Ababa. So I would like to talk about the way out. I don't know if you have a question about that, but there needs to be a way out of this.
Way out of this. I think we can summarize by that one, but I cannot help but when you say that all territories of Tigray is under the control of Tigray, I want clarification on this one, that you're talking about including Badime.
Correct.
Yeah, so Dr. Abbey accepted the boundary commission decision as it is. That's why he was getting that attention, although he was not able to implement that stuff. Yeah. And my question was it the responsibility of the federal government? If that the federal government is responsible, I would assume that the troops that is in Badime and other contested areas are that of the federal government. But now, from what I'm understanding from you, is the forces within Tigray, the disputed territory, is all controlled by the Tigrayan army.
Yep. So let me expound more on that. Okay. So there are two things here. Okay, who controls the boundaries? It's the federal government. Yeah. All right. And we still have the defense forces in Tigray.
The federal
government defense forces. But one thing you have to understand is, in principle, that defense force should be free from allegiance with any party or any entity. So as soldiers, as defenders of the country's sovereignty, they are out there and working hand in hand with the Tigray military system. So far, there has not been a situation. But even if there is a situation where the federal government wants to change that, I think the Tigray forces are well capable of controlling that. That's what I was trying to say. That's one thing. With respect to the Badma and the relationship with Eritrea, now Badma is today under the control of the Ethiopian state. But at the same time, Tzorana is at the control of the Eritrean government. Well, the decision by the court puts Tzorana in Ethiopia and puts Badma in Eritrea. So I hear many Eritreans talking about Badma, pulling out of Badma, Ethiopian forces out of Badma. Well, they should also talk about pulling Eritrean forces out of Tzorana too.
Was it part of the Boundary Commission's decision?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. So it's the Tigrayans' claim that Tzorana should be part of the other one.
Whoever claimed, the court decided that, right?
They decided that, yeah.
Yep. So if we have to go by that.
Eritreans are taking over Tzorana, disregarding the decision from the Boundary Commission?
No. So even before the war, Tzorana was in Eritrea. It has always been an Eritrean part.
Okay.
And Badma was under Ethiopian control before the war. Now the Boundary Commission came and said Badma is an Eritrean part and Tzorana is Ethiopian part, which, by the way, that's a reckless decision from some European powers to leave us under conflict all the time. Sometimes I also think it's purposefully done. But that's why there needs to be a negotiation. Why would you put the people of Tzorana, who has always believed that they are Eritreans, why would you dismantle them from their land or leave them under the control of other administration? The same goes for people in Badma. So there has to be a negotiation. Of course, it has to be implemented. If they say no negotiation, let's implement it, that's also fine. But both of them will have to pull out their soldiers. So it's not only Tzorana. On the Afar side, there are many lands that were never part of the Ethiopian Afar side. Now they are put under the Ethiopian side. The only reason the Eritrean government uses Badma as the key point is to maintain the status quo. They always to blame, okay, there is our enemy on the other side holding our land. The reality on the ground is that the Eritrean forces are in Tzorana, which is decided by the Boundary Commission, is a part of Ethiopia. So if they have to pull, both of them will have to pull out. But neither Dr. Abbey, nor President Isaias are willing to talk about that because the resolution of this conflict and this situation would be a risk, more specifically to President Isaias.
Okay. You see, now the Tzorana information, I just heard about it, I have to admit my...
Sure.
But if there is a boundary commission, unconditionally accept, and everybody has to go to their respective sovereign territory, regardless what. And my understanding is the Ethiopian, and particularly the Tigray administration, refused to do that. But there was some misinformation here that who's controlling those areas. That's what I wanted to clear out. Is it the Ethiopian federal government or the Tigrayan state troops and whatever force you call them? That was the reason. So an Eritrean, just like any other African country's history, we all are the product of the colonial treaty, and those were trying to be implemented. And they did from both sides. They had their lawyers, and they spent a couple of years talking about it, and finally, this is it. In fact, when Meles Zenawi trying to amend the decision, the United Nations clearly rejected it. The 21-page stuff like that. That's why I wanted some clarity, but we can continue this discussion some other time.
Sure.
But I just wanted to see the power of Kullal, regional states of Tigray, with that of the federal government, how it affected the Eritrean issue.
Yep.
So Meles, Prime Minister is not talking about it anymore. He doesn't talk about the conflict. Isaias is not talking about it. In fact, he postponed it. He said, this is not an issue that matters right now. While 100,000 people from both sides sacrificed their life to honor and respect their sovereignty. So on that basis, that's why I'm bringing the issue. The conflict is still out there for Eritreans to accept mutual respect to their neighbors. They have to get what they deserve, the territories. But a discussion for another day.
Sure.
Now, you brought a very interesting thing that what the future holds in Ethiopia. If this kind of conflict between the Tigray regional administration with that of the federal government, is it an ongoing process? Because the rhetoric is getting very hot on both sides. So what would it be if they continue to demonize Tigray and Tigray continue to demonize Prime Minister and his cliques? What's going to be the solution?
I think the way out of the quagmire that we are in today is to form an all-inclusive government, or to start a dialogue with all the political powers in Ethiopia and discuss about how the next government should be formed. That's the only way I see for Ethiopia. Specific to Dr. Abbey, if he is not willing to do this, I think he has to start negotiating his parachute landing, as they say. When the CEOs of big companies here, they are kicked out of their power, they are given parachute landing. So
a golden parachute.
A golden parachute. So I think he has to negotiate that. It's a matter of time before he is disposed of his position that he has today. If Dr. Abbey is smart enough, he would immediately call for a dialogue between release all political prisoners first, and then call for all-inclusive dialogue of all Ethiopian political entities, and ratify a path for Ethiopia, for a new government, and also maybe plan for a truce and reconciliation for the future government. Otherwise, if Dr. Abbey plans to continue his dictatorial process, it's a matter of months before he loses his power. And I'm afraid his end might be like that of Colonel Muammar Gaddafi, or many of the dictators who end up losing their lives.
Thank you. I really appreciate the fact we'll have another person who will have a counter view to the Ethiopian affair. But at the same time, I like to remind the audience, please buy this book, the Habesha Chronicles. You can find it with a book page. The book page. It has 40 stories, very suitable for all ages. I would assume so. I have seen a few of them already. Again, I really thank you for taking your time and discussing this issue with us. Sure. Current issues and on election. This will not be the last one, but we'll see you again some other time. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Petros.
Okay. Yep. On that note, we'll end today's program, and we'll see you with the next Beyond the Headlines program sometimes next week. Until then, have a nice one. Thank you.